Democrats, where Donald Trump could be facing the greatest threat to his presidency yet. For the first time since taking office, prosecutors have tied the president directly to federal crimes. Those prosecutors say Mr. Trump directed his former lawyer, Michael Cohen, to make illegal hush payments to two women who claimed they had affairs with Mr. Trump. We've also learned that Cohen spoke to a Russian contact in November 2015 who offered, quote, political synergy. And another revelation, there are these new documents about the lies allegedly told by the former Trump campaign chairman, Paul Manafort. All this comes at a critical time with the White House preparing for a major staffing change. And the big question, who is going to replace John Kelly as chief of staff now that the hot favorite has turned down the role? Our CNN political analyst Seung Min Kim is in Washington, and she joins us now. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Let's first talk about Trump's response on Twitter. It's interesting because he's firing back as usual, and he's all over the place, with fake news is the enemy of the people. He's retweeting no smoking gun, collusion is an illusion. He's trying really hard to control and to steer the narrative. But is the Russia cloud just getting darker and darker and just too overwhelming for him to navigate?
Well, he's been trying to do this with the Mueller probe for some time. We have seen repeatedly, time and again, how he's discredited the special counsel's investigation, calling it fake news, calling it a witch hunt, calling it a band of angry all Democrats, which is not accurate. But you do see how the legal filings that we saw filed late last week really shows this big legal cloud that is enveloping the Trump administration when it comes to these dual issues, whether it's these hush payments to the women who have alleged to have affairs with him, and also on the Russia matter. And what we saw the president react as how he has been reacting last week when in advance of the filings he said, or right after the filings he said, totally clears the president. That's not true, as we all know. The filings directly implicate the president in these in the one matter. And he is going to continue to decry the Mueller investigation because that's been the strategy for the legal team for some time, really bring down the public confidence in the special counsel's investigation with voters and make this a political fight, not necessarily a legal one.
Yeah, the legal cloud is getting bigger. Now the U.S. president directly implicated. Robert Mueller increasingly showing the cards and showing what he has in his hand. A lot of questionable, a lot of fraudulent behavior has been revealed. But when is it going to lead to the big question, whether anyone, member of Trump's staff, anyone in the Trump camp, actually conspired with Russia to interfere in the election?
That is a question that only Robert Mueller and his team knows. I think there's been a sense sometime that Mueller's activity is really picking up, as we've seen with the flurry of recent filings last week. He did go through a quiet time before the midterm elections here in the United States. But in terms of who will get charged, what will happen, again, that's something that the special counsel only knows. But I can also tell you that on Capitol Hill and here in Washington, there's chatter that is ramping up about the political impact of these filings. Democrats have been congressional Democrats have been pretty cautious to avoid that big I word, impeachment, surrounding President Trump for some time. But you've seen how Democratic lawmakers, powerful Democratic lawmakers, have started to kind of dip their toes into this matter. You have Jerry Nadler, who is the top Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee. He will be the chairman next year. And he says he's looking at these filings and says certainly they are impeachable offenses, and not necessarily saying that he's going to pursue that matter himself. But this becomes a major fight once Democrats officially take control of the House next year. Yep. And there's going to be a major battle as to how far to actually push potential impeachment proceedings. Right now, Democrats are still being cautious, but the more information that we get, the more filings that we get, that calculus could change.
Yeah, it's going to get tougher at the White House, and John Kelly is gone. That was long expected. The search still on for the next chief of staff for Donald Trump. Who is going to be willing to step up and replace him?
That's a great question. And I also want to remind your viewers that, remember, the White House had said John Kelly would stay on through the 2020 re-election. That ended up not being true, and no one here in Washington really believed that. But there are several candidates that are in the running that the president is considering. But his first choice, Nick Ayers, who's Vice President Pence's current chief of staff, who was widely expected to take that role or assume the White House chief of staff role, has said he's now out of the running. Our sources at the Washington Washington Post told us that Trump, the president and Nick Ayers could not agree on kind of the terms of the employment. Nick Ayers wanted something more temporary. He has 3 young children. He wanted to go back to his home state of Georgia someday. And the president is really looking for someone who can stay on through the re-election campaign and kind of steer the ship of the White House and be that steady presence. But we know that the chief of staff role is a difficult one for this White House, for this president. Reince Priebus, the first chief of staff, he was unceremoniously told of the dismissal on Twitter. John Kelly, his clashes with the president have been legendary. So this is a job that, you know, it's going to be very difficult to fill. There's Mick Mulvaney, the budget director, is being talked about, the Treasury Secretary, Stephen Mnuchin, Mark Meadows, who's a congressman from North Carolina who has been the president's one of the most stalwart allies in Congress. But again, who wants to take that? Who wants to take such a difficult job? It'll be interesting to find out who ultimately assumes that role.
Trump is headstrong. He is impulsive. He is hard to wrangle. Seung Min Kim will leave it at that. Thank you so much. Talk again soon.
Thanks for having me.